Hey, what's up, everyone? Hope you're all doing well still. I've been doing okay. I mean, I went to NAM, which was a lot of fun, but then I got sick immediately after NAM, so that wasn't so fun. But today I'm feeling well enough to try to do another video, so I figured I might as well try to cover another topic. And today I wanted to cover the topic of chords. Not so much how to play them, more some interesting ways to use them and some different ways to think about them. And I also want to talk about my favorite chord, or a chord that I've just been finding myself using a lot, that I just really like the sound of, and some interesting ways that I've found to use that. But first of all, we should probably talk about a few things just to kind of lead us up to that topic. So first, I want to talk to you about substitutions a little bit. So I've talked a little bit about substitutions before. So the basic concept of substitutions is basically you're just substituting one chord for another chord, which at first seems like a weird topic because usually you think, oh, well, I learned the minor chord, which is the sad chord, and then the major chord, which is the happy chord, and then you learn like the dominant seventh chord, which is like the bluesy, or you can also think of it as like the dramatic chord. That's always the chord that wants to go up to, the one chord. Now that's true, but what you may not know is that you can also actually sometimes use some of those chords in place of each other. Sometimes you could use like a minor chord in place of a major chord. And you might think that sounds weird because they're two completely different chords, but if you think about it, like for example, if we take like a minor 7 chord, let's just take an A minor 7 chord. And then let's write down what the notes are. So the notes of that are A, C, E, and G. So A, C, E, G. And then from there, let's play a C major triad, which is... Alright, so now let's take a C major chord. Or let's actually play just the open chord. So C major. Now that has the notes C, E, and G in it. That's a C major triad. Now if you notice, both chords have the notes C, E, and G, so what we can do is actually add an A note. So you just take that open chord, you just put a finger on second fret of G, which is A, and that gives you a C major 6 chord. Now what this tells us is that a C major 6 chord is the same thing as an A minor 7 chord, but just with the notes inverted. You can even hear just there's not much of a difference there besides it's starting on a different note. So in a way, you could think of those two chords as being chords that could be kind of used interchangeably, depending on what kind of sound you want to go for in your songs or in your arrangements. Now another interesting thing is if you take like a half diminished chord, or minor, otherwise known as a minor 7 flat 5 chord. Let's just take a B minor 7 flat 5. Here we have the notes B, F, A, and D. Now if we go up and play a minor 7 chord starting on D, D minor 7. And then let's take that minor 7th note, which is C, and bring that down to B. Now those two chords are also the same, because if we look at this, we have D, A, B, F. I forgot what the last note was for a second. So B, F, A, D, D, A, B, F. So those are all the same notes, just scrambled in a different order. So that tells us a half diminished chord is the same thing as a D minor 6 chord. So I really just wanted to go over that really quickly because learning that little bit of information really made me realize that a lot of chords that we know can be used in so many different ways rather than just thinking of it as like, oh, this is major chord and that's it. So now I want to move on to the main topic of the video, which is actually my favorite chord, or my favorite chord at the moment that I really enjoy the sound of right now. And my favorite chord right now is actually this. So it's not a super complex chord, but it's a little more different than you would think it is right away. So basically, I'd say the most simple way to analyze this would be it's a D major triad, but with a G in the bass. And something about just changing that bass note just makes it sound really pleasant to me. So when you analyze it this way, I don't know if it'd be considered a polychord because I'm not technically playing two completely separate chords, but I think it would be considered a bitonal chord because I'm hinting at two completely different sounds. Like the note G doesn't really have anything to do with the D major triad. It would be a fourth away from D, but then again, it wouldn't really be a sus chord because you're putting it in the bass. And that's one thing I like to do to try to get different sounds in chords, is that you can just take chords that you know, maybe a major 7 chord, and then just move the bass note around. So see what kind of sounds you get. And then sometimes you stumble across some really cool sounding chords just doing that. All right, so like I said before, D major over G is actually just one way that I found to analyze this chord. And then just to see how it sounds in context, a lot of times I like to just play 2-5-1 in the key of whatever would make that the 1 chord. So in this case, if you just play 2-5-1 in D major, so that would be E minor 7, and then you could hear what that sounds like in that context. Now, the more that I started messing around with this chord, the more I realized I could actually use it in a lot of different contexts and make it make sense. So first I analyzed it in the key of D major, but what if we actually analyzed it in the key of G major? Where this is actually, the bass note is actually the root note. So in terms of G, that would be A, which would be the sus2, or the 9th. Then you have D, which would be the 5th. And then you have this F sharp, which would be the major 7th. So in this case, it would be like a G major 7 with a sus2. And actually no third. Or of course this is B up here, so you can actually add the third on top. Which even further emphasizes the major sound. So again, you can kind of test that out doing 2-5-1 in the key of G. So that would be like A minor 7. I'll just play that here. And then maybe something like... And that's the same exact chord, but we're just thinking of it in the key of G major this time. Now, the third way I thought to do it is, how about we take it in the context of B minor 7? Because, again, when you add that last note, it goes from a D major chord to a B minor 7 chord. But then again, with the G in the bass. So in this case, minor 2-5-1, that would be C sharp minor 7 flat 5. 2. And then... And that gets you a really cool sound. Now the fourth way, because I just wanted to continue stretching this along and trying to see how much I can get out of this one chord, we can also think of it in the context of D minor, or not D minor, E minor. So in the context of E, that would give us G, which is the minor 3rd, A, which is the sus4, D, which is the minor 7, and then F sharp, which would be a 9th. And then if you want to add B on top, that would just be the 5th. So it all works anyway. So in this case, or you can even play the open E string. Then that kind of helps you hear the sound of that E minor chord. But in this case, you can analyze it as an E minor sus4 with an additional 9th. Yeah, that would be it. So E minor 7 sus4 with an additional 9th. If you did a minor 2-5-1 in E minor, so F sharp minor 7 flat 5 to, let's do a tritone sub, and then back to that chord. So there we found two ways to use it as a major chord, and also two ways to use it as a minor chord. Now, is there a way to use it as a dominant 7th chord? Well, in this case, if we look back and think of that as the D chord, if you think of it, a D major chord is just a dominant 7th chord without 7th. So maybe we could use that chord as a way to get to G major. So let's try hearing a 2-5-1 in G major, trying to sub that in for a dominant chord. Now that's kind of a cool sound because it's a little ambiguous. It's not as obvious as going from here to here. It's not an obvious resolution, especially because the bass note stays the same. In this case, I actually kept the bass note G the entire time. So it's kind of a cool sound because it's a little ambiguous. If you want to create a song that's not super obvious with some of its resolutions, that's kind of a cool way to do it. Alright, so the last thing I wanted to do is actually play a 2-5-1 using nothing but that chord shape, because we technically have a minor chord, a major chord, and a dominant chord just out of that one shape. So let's just do it in the key of D major. So first we need some kind of E minor chord. So in this case, we could go up here and play that E minor 7 over C. And that would be the 2 chord. And then from there, we can use an A major triad over D in place of the A7 chord. Maybe put that F sharp on top. And then from there, we need some kind of D chord, in which we can just slide down to this D major triad over G and end it there. So that 2-5-1 would sound something like this. So it's not a super obvious resolution again, but it's actually something that sounds a lot different and a little modern actually. So it's actually a really useful tool to get some different sounds. Now I remember when I was back at Musicians Institute, one of my jazz guitar instructors, Sid Jacobs, actually had a name for these chords. He used to coin the term chameleon chords, and that's what he would use to refer to chords that just had lots of different uses, that you could just put the same shape into a lot of different contexts. Like to the point where you just play 2-5-1 using nothing but that shape. So yeah, that is my favorite chord at the moment, not only because it's a really nice sounding chord, at least in my opinion, it's also just a very useful chord. You can get a lot of use out of it, and I've definitely used it in a lot of my arrangements. For example, you can use it in something like something like that. Or if you've seen my 500 Miles High video, I actually used it twice in that video. Alright, but that's about it for this topic for me, so I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something new and maybe found something a little interesting to start working on your instrument, whether it's a guitar or a piano or any kind of choral instrument, or if you're just a composer, it's very useful for composing as well. But yeah, that's about it. I will catch you on the next video, which will hopefully be soon.